because the new BBC Director General and Editor-in-Chief, Mr. Tim Davie, has taken over today. He succeeds Tony Hall, Lord Hall, who has moved on, I think, to the National Gallery after having done his job of work for quite some time. Huge speculation about what Mr. Davie would do in terms of the pensioners and the licence fee, and it looks as if he may be trying desperately to do the right thing by the pensioners, if that is your view. Huge speculation as well about what he would do to try and police political impartiality amongst some, not all by any means, but some BBC political journalists. And lo and behold, we wake up this morning to find that the first thing he wishes to address is left-wing comedy on the BBC, which he does not like. Konstantin Kisin, who is a comedian and co-host of the Trigonometry podcast, joins me live. Konstantin, is this a joke in itself, or is it a wise move on the part of Mr. Davie?
Oh, very wise. I think it's been a long time coming. It seems to me like they've appointed the right person to take over, because it's about time the BBC, which I'm a big fan of, by the way, started to address the perception out there in the wider public that they don't really listen or hear the views of ordinary people, probably the majority of people in this country.
But some people will cite an example like "Have I Got News for You?" that is forever getting at Boris Johnson and the government, and before that were forever getting at Theresa May and her government, etc., etc., etc. Because in a sense, grown-up comedy, even on the BBC, takes a pop at authority. They happen to be an authority. If it was Mr. Blair or Mr. Corbyn or Sir Keir Starmer, they'd be the targets of it.
Oh, absolutely. I think Have I Got News for You might be a show that is less prone to some of these problems. But if you look at the other shows, whether it's Mock the Week, whether it's the MASH Report, which I've worked on. So I'm not saying that the BBC is just irredeemable, but I do think there's a widespread perception, and I think it's a correct perception, that comedy on the BBC, and it's not so much about left and right, by the way. I think it's more about whether it's woke or anti-woke. And just to give you a counterexample to what you're talking about in terms of challenging authority, I do think it's very important that we have satire that mocks and challenges the government, whatever the color of that government is. But equally, when you have, so for example, I think it's reasonable to argue that the government under Boris Johnson right now has proven itself to be fairly useless. But equally, at the point of the last election, I had a stand-up routine from my show that went pretty viral about Jeremy Corbyn being quite useless, which I also thought was a fair point, and it was a very funny routine. But you would never see anything like that on the BBC, because it was considered inappropriate, or you were somehow punching down, or wherever it might have been. So I think it's really about creating balance. I don't think we should
balance in the sense of take the mickey out of everybody.
Well, that's exactly it.
I mean, I don't know if you noticed, but Matt Chorley, who works with Times Radio, sister organisation, brother organisation, I'll get in trouble for saying that. Anyway, another organisation under the same roof of us, ran a World Cup Who's the Best Prime Minister We Never Had, and it was predictable names like Ken Clarke and going back to lovely Mo Mowlam and folk like that. And Jeremy Corbyn won it. And that became a huge running gag on Twitter for about 24 hours.
Absolutely. I can't imagine too many Jews voted on that one. But look, I think the reality is that the BBC is starting to pay attention to the views of ordinary people, which I think is a good thing. There's a lot of people that I'm friends with that think it should be defunded. I'm glad to see the BBC's taken some steps to address the perceived bias so that doesn't happen. Because as I said, I'm a big fan of the BBC, and I don't actually think that we need some kind of, fire of burning down every single left-wing comedy show at all. I just think you need balance. That is what the people of this country expect. And what you really want from a BBC comedy show is for a whole family, a multi-generational family, the grandparents who may have voted Brexit, the parents who may be mixed in their views, and the sort of woke young kids to be able to sit down together and watch a show, and for there to be something for everybody. That's really what a good comedy show, in my opinion, should be. And I hope that these changes achieve
that's
that.
Fascinating, because talking to several folk who are friends of mine, who exactly as you've just described, who have families and younger children, or in my case, slightly older children. But that notion of here is something that you can sit down and watch, and you won't be sitting there thinking, oh my God, Granny just heard the X word, or goodness me, I'm now going to have to go and explain what X, Y, or Z is to my 13-year-old, and so on. here's a thought, though. Therefore, might it not be safer to leave risque comedy absolutely to guys like you, left, right, middle, libertarian, doesn't matter, and have that all available online? You can follow your podcast. There are millions of others out there. Rory Bremner's a mate of mine, and he pods regularly and does stuff, and it's very, very funny. But Davey should be doing precisely what he's doing in saying if it's going to be on mainstream, it's not left or right. It's about passing that family barrier. And do you think he might do that? I mean, you've described it eloquently. Do you think he might go for that?
I don't know. We'll find out. I think my point was less about that. I'm not talking about risque comedy. Of course, on the mainstream where you're beaming stuff into millions of homes, you don't want to be, doing the sort of stuff that we'd normally be doing in a comedy club. Of course, you don't want to be doing that. And I think you're right. The success of my show, Trigonometry, is partly down to the fact that people are looking for something with a little bit more spice, a little bit more flavor, and they're happy to do that online. But I think the conversation that's important here is not so much about family friendly or family unfriendly. It's much more about, can you have a TV show that's a comedy or a panel show where a Brexit voting grandfather can sit down with his ultra liberal grandson or granddaughter and sit together and enjoy a show. And she goes, oh, look at that. They're making fun of people like you. And the next minute, he goes, oh, look at them making fun of people like you. And actually, everybody feels like they're included. Nobody feels like they are the perpetual target. And that is, I think, where...
Can you just imagine the commissioning editor for comedy on the BBC saying, right, the only way this is going to get through and get passed and go on air is if it offends everybody in equal measure.
Well, that to me is great comedy. That is, you've just defined it, really, haven't you, Alastair? That is perfect comedy. That's how I've always tried to do. And this is, I think, something that people forget, is that's how comedy used to be. I mean, think about Spitting Image. It wasn't a show that pulled punches on either side. It made fun of everybody. Everybody was caricatured. Everybody was there to be made fun of. That is the sign of great comedy, when you're making fun of everybody and everybody feels included.
Cast your mind back to the first attempt at Spitting Image. And here's the thing, I sat and I didn't weep about it, but I just thought, goodness me. And you began this whole conversation saying it's not so much about left or right, it's about wokery. That one of the great debates in the new Spitting Image team, which I think is going out on BritBox, is how black people can be portrayed or not, who does the voices or not, rather than if you go back to the first time when the debate was, right, we're going to take the rip out of politicians left, right and centre, which they did, and we're going to take the rip out of the royal family, which they did and got away with it. But now the caution has come back, and it's caution over race, ethnicity, and language.
As you know from your own experiences, of course. But the issue there, I think, is that it's very patronizing to minorities to suggest that they can't be made fun of. I have many black friends. I have other friends from other minorities. I am an immigrant myself. I think there's so much humor to be had there that can be both sensitive, respectful, and make fun of people. That's what comedians have always done. I think we just need to acknowledge the fact that not everyone's hypersensitive. And I'm afraid what we've had in the last... we've been on a mass sort of delusion for the last 4 years, haven't we? Particularly since Brexit, where, some of the hysteria that's been happening, the tail has been wagging the dog. A small minority of activists have been able to shut down things they don't like. They've been able to get people sacked and fired for making comments that weren't in any way offensive, actually, to ordinary people. And I think that's really where there's been a lot of problem, where you allow a small bunch of people to pretend that they speak for everybody. People from all backgrounds, black people, ethnic minority people, are just as up for a laugh. They're just as able to understand what a joke is. And to suggest otherwise, I think, is patronizing. And it's a sort of soft racism in a way, to suggest that they can't be part of that humorous conversation.
Great to talk to you, Konstantin Kisin, and you can get more of him and his thoughts on Trigonometry, the podcast, and available in various other formats as well. Very, very thoughtful how you can produce comedy that's genuinely funny and doesn't offend folk, but don't hold back from addressing any subject if he, she or they are in the news.